Hello, and welcome to what is the last 10 minutes of Lost Sound from Operation MB8, where I was talking about one of the potential lessons that can be drawn from Operation Judgment, from the attack on Taranto, and from MB8 as a whole. Basically, that you go to war with not what you have in terms of all the equipment you already have built, but what you have available. It's not even everything you have, it's what's actually available and working. And in this one, the reason I go into this is because it's one of those critical lessons. If we go quickly over the events we've been discussing and discussed it in detail in the previous in more detail in the previous video, the 4th to 11th, there's Convoy AN6. That is when 4 slow tankers are taken to Greece from Egypt, escorted by a trawler, and not escorted, but they shape their route not far from them, by both Force B, which is HMS Ajax and HMS Sydney, and Force C, which is HMS Orion, which has Vice Admiral Prindham Whipple aboard. So basically, he's taken only his own ship to do that duty, but yeah, he's gone himself. It's quite a good Vice Admiral if you think about it, because he could have gone, no, I should have my cruisers with me to escort me. Nope. He goes, he takes his own flagship and goes and does the job himself. There's also MW3, which is 3 empty merchant vessels going to making Alexandria to Malta. They are escorted by one of the scrap iron destroyers and HMS Coventry and HMS Terror. There's a debate as to whether it's 3 RN destroyers or 3 more of the scrap iron flotilla destroyers. And in the earlier video, I just mentioned the scrap iron flotilla destroyers because I'm fairly certain it's them. But there is a potential, quite also a strong potential it's 3 of the other RN destroyers. The point is, politely, it gets quite mucked up at certain points, the sheer amount of ships going around. And I'm also going to clear up one of the other things I mentioned earlier but didn't mention in full detail because I was trying to get it under the 70-minute mark, which was proving quite interesting because the earlier videos kept coming in at the 2.5-hour mark, and for a long patrol that wasn't really sensible, and therefore this happened. And I thought I got it that right, and the sound was fine on this version of the computer, but when it's uploaded, and every time it's been uploaded into YouTube, it's lost the last 10 minutes for some reason. There's been a beep, and then the 10 minutes have gone silent, and I have no idea what's happening there. It is the first time I have rendered these videos into high definition, so that might be something to do with it, but I don't know. Anyway, 7th to 9th is Operation Coat, which is the reinforcement of Malta, and also the reinforcement of the Mediterranean fleet, thanks to Barham, Berwick, Glasgow, and some destroyers. And as while that's going on, Operation Clarke takes place, which is HMS Ark Royal going off and attacking some various lovely Italian positions in Sardinia. And then, of course, there's Operation Judgment, which involves the Battle of Otranto and the Battle of Taranto. Oh, and there's another convoy as well, ME3, which is 4 merchant vessels sailing in ballast from Malta to Alexandria, also escorted by HMS Ramleys, Coventry, and 2 destroyers. So, here is with the correction added in on the cruisers. Because I listed just HMS Dispatch because my instinct thinks it might be Dispatch. Because while she's listed as arriving on the 15th, I think she comes down with the home fleet ships, and that's what she does seem to be coming with, and therefore goes straight through with the home fleet ships into the operation. So she's listed as arriving in Gibraltar on the 15th, would make sense, because she's done the whole thing. But it might not have been her. There is also the option of HMS Calcutta, who is talked about in some of the sources. However, other sources say they only have 1 C-class AA cruiser in this operation, and still more the official documents get confusing because most of them seem to be talking about a D-class cruiser, and the only D-class cruiser that's there, could possibly be there, is Dispatch. So, if you read sources with Calcutta in it, they could well be right. If you read sources with Dispatch in it, they could be right. Both could be right. In fact, here is the dirty little secret. Both could be completely right. Both ships could be there, because this is a frantic time for the Royal Navy. This is a lot of operations going on as they are trying to do a huge number of things. As the convoys have shown you, they are reinforcing Malta. They are trying to reinforce the Mediterranean fleet. They are attacking the Italians in several places. And they are reinforcing Greece. They are reinforcing Crete. They are moving supplies backwards and forwards. The one thing I can tell you is that even the best organizations don't always have the best records. Especially when you have a lot of things and a lot of moving parts. A lot of things involved and a lot of moving parts. It's one of the reasons why I'm not 100% sure which flotilla each of these destroyers are in. It's some destroyers are being moved flotilla for this operation, and some flotillas get their names changed and all sorts of things. So I have 8th destroyer flotilla, which is contiguous for the entire operation. And I have the scrap iron flotilla, which is contiguous for the entire operation. And that is also, it's one of the things that makes sense of them is if they are doing the operation which that claim that's listed as free, as I mentioned earlier, could be free RN destroyers rather than free more of the scrap iron float. But it could be. Anyway, let's get into the bonus discussion. And the reason is, this is the missing vessel. Go back here, no mention of Eagle. Even though she's been having an incredibly active time, she's been involved taking a convoy to Malta, and on the 12th of October, that's when she's damaged by near misses from SM-79s based in Sicily. The damage isn't found to the 5th of November. She does actually other operations on the 27th of November. She carries Swordfish between 18 and 24 and 7 Sea Gladiators as her air group. She is a very useful asset, but more importantly, she's a very experienced air group, which is well worked up. And that's another reason why 5 of her aircraft are taken off and joined into HMS Illustrious's air group. And it's one of those things. She is an incredibly useful asset. We now don't think of that because of what happens to her, because of the way her career ends. She's written off most often in history as being this old, slow, almost anachronism. But actually, she's an incredibly useful vessel in these early months in the Mediterranean, and she's doing incredibly useful work escorting convoys. One of the reasons why Cunningham is quite so happy to go off and risk taking on the Mediterranean fleet of the Italian, the Reggio Marina, despite being outnumbered, despite having 4 battleships, including HMS Ramillies, to their 6, and trying to get them out, is because he has the strike power of Eagle and the strike power of Illustrious behind him. He knows how capable these assets are. He has Rear Admiral Lister, who was captain of Glorious, who planned the attack from HMS Glorious on Taranto back in the earlier 1930s. This is a really experienced air arm group. Cunningham knows this, Cunningham understands this, and Cunningham wants to make use of it. And the thing is, if the attack had been launched on 21st of October, HMS Eagle, even if the damage hadn't been found, because look, she's still doing operations on the 27th of October, would have been there along with Illustrious. They'd have also had 3 more Swordfish, because one of the reasons it doesn't take place on 21st of October is because 3 Swordfish get damaged in a fire. Some of them actually get restored to service. but 3 swordfish get damaged in a fire on Illustrious. So, here is the reality. The reality is the Royal Navy launches an attack with 21 swordfish from HMS Illustrious, because despite her carrying an air group of 21 swordfish, 15 Fulmars, and 2 Sea Gladiators, when you only have one carrier, you risk a lot less. So she sends in 2 waves of aircraft, one of 12, one of 9, of which only 8 make it in the second wave. So that's 20 aircraft, resulting in 10 torpedo aircraft getting through and launching attacks, because of the first wave of 12, there's only 6 carrying torpedoes, and on the second wave, 5, and it's one of those torpedo carriers which has to turn back. Which means the 10 attacks result in Conte de Cavour gets hit once, Andrea Doria gets hit 0 times for 2 attempts, Giulio gets hit once for 1 attempt, Littorio hit 3 times for 4 attempts, Vittorio Veneto hit 0 times for 2 attempts, and Giulio Cesare hit 0 times. And the oil tanks are put on fire by dive bombing. Let's go back to what happens if you have Illustrious and Eagle present. Well, Illustrious carries 18 swordfish and 15 Fulmars in that circumstance. Very nicely laid out, and quite an air group of 33. She can actually accommodate more, so she can take 36 to 40 aircraft. So they might have actually loaded her up with more. And when I say loaded her up with more, might have found some more Sea Gladiators. There are a few wandering around, and even possibly a couple more swordfish. But we will never know. And then there's Eagle with 18 swordfish and 7 Sea Gladiators. Now, this is all based, this idea, on what is known about the Eagle Available plan and the Into All Glorious plan. But basically, it leads to an attack group of 36 swordfish and 9 Fulmars. So strikes 3 waves of each comprised of 8 torpedo-armed swordfish, 4 bomb-armed swordfish, and 3 Fulmars armed with flares and bombs. Which would make sense. Okay, you can fit a flare carrier to a Fulmar, you can take a small bomb as well. Not great, but it's fine, and it frees up your swordfish to do the other jobs. And the reason why you're taking the flares is because they're going to drop the bright lights, which both illuminate the targets and blind, hopefully, the AA gunners. The bombers, their main role going in is to cause fires and disruptions, etc., to distract people from the torpedo bombers. Now, I have fought that with 2 carriers and having more space. The odds are that you don't lose 1 aircraft due to maintenance issues and having to fly back, but you might do. So I've put it though for 24 attacks, because that's easier, because you can't predict availability. But 1 in 21 means in 24 maybe it's 1 more, so maybe it's 1 less attack. Who knows? But when you do this in any form of testing, and I had a friend run through this on Harpoon, and a few other people have looked over this for me, and I have gone over this several times, using various dice-based working. You end up with Conte de Cavour getting hit 2 for 2, Andrea Doria getting hit 1 for 4, Giulio getting hit 2 for 2, Littorio getting hit 6 for 9, and Vittorio Veneto getting hit 1 for 4, and Giulio Cesare again escaping 0 for 3. And oil tankers again on fire. Now, you're going to be sitting there going, that's, Alex, that is weird odds. Why is that? Why are the attacks spread out so that way? Well, thank you, armoured carriers. Thank you, my good friend Jamie. You have a picture on your light, which explains it. Basically, it's where the battleships are lined up. Giulio Cesare, as you can see, is literally behind there. You will attack Giulio, you will attack Vittorio, you will attack Vittorio Veneto, anything before you reach Giulio Cesare. Because if you're going in a straight line over it, you have to go straight over the Fiume, Sara, and Gorzia, the cruisers. No one wants to do that. And straight through the barrage balloons. Again, no one wants to do this. The little black dots are destroyers. It just gets worse the further you get, the more you look at it. So Giulio Cesare is safe. But the others, they're all exposed. And the more aircraft you have coming in, the more likely they are to be hit, especially the third wave, because the sheer amount of AA ammunition which is being is expended by the Italians, especially the ships, means that by the third wave, they are pretty much out of ammunition. Which is why you end up with the strike figures you do. Now, let's think about this. Because there is enough damage done by a single torpedo hit on some of these battleships that they pretty much never come back into service. And Littorio comes back into service after 3 hits because she's so valuable. After 6 hits, she ain't floating ever again. In fact, she might well go sky high. If we consider the number of vessels which are hit, you end up with the Italians only having 1 vessel still in service. So when Operation White takes place, which is the next attempt to resupply Malta with Hurricanes, flying them from HMS Argus covered by Force H, if the Italians sortie to try and deal with it, well, what happens originally is Cesare and Vittorio Veneto sortie. And that's 2 battleships. And Force H only has Renown with it and Ark Royal. And they basically decide they want to withdraw. Because Renown might be able to fight off the 2 Scharnhorst and have that in her back pocket. But Vittorio Veneto and Giulia Cesare, those are 2 worked up battleships. And those are pucker battleships with decent sized guns. There's a difference. But Giulia Cesare on her own, Ark Royal backing up Renown, well, there's a difference that might happen there. There is a big difference which might happen there. You have pretty much you've more than doubled your number of aircraft, and you have pretty much wiped out the Italian fleet for the next 6 months. And this is what would have happened if there hadn't been a fire in HMS Illustrious's hangar, which had crippled, which had meant that it had been delayed, and they hadn't found the issues with Eagle, or if she hadn't been damaged by the bombing, and so hadn't been needed to be repaired. All these things, you have Eagle there. This is not a what if this ship magically appears. No, this is a ship which is sitting in Alexandria during the operation, sitting there because of damage she has sustained. But there is an actual plan for her. And the point comes down to this. This is the same strike group, or actually, HMS Ark Royal could have put in a bigger strike group than this. Ark Royal I often would point out, is the best ship to do the strike. She's designed. She's the Royal Navy strike carrier. Her role is to go and find the enemy in harbour, is to take them out. But if you can't have her, then the Royal Navy's doctrine of multi-carrier operations comes into play. And that's the point. Taranto is planned as a multi-carrier operation. And as a multi-carrier operation, a lot more of these ships die. I'm not talking a lot more of them are damaged. I'm talking a lot more of them die. Because, let's be honest, the damage you do with the torpedoes is one thing. But if Littorio blows up after 6 torpedoes hit her in the middle of that harbour, and 6 torpedoes could well lead to the level of damage which blows her up, and that's going to cause even more damage. The whole point about Taranto is it's an Operation MB8, it's a massive Mascaravoca. in many ways. There are so many moving parts. There are so many convoys going backwards and forwards. So many ships involved that even the British sort of lose track over which ones are involved. That the Italians lose track. They have been blinded in one part of the ocean because their reconnaissance forces have been attacked by Ark Royal. And they know Ark Royal's the strike carrier, so they're fixated on her anyway. She is the best carrier. Given modern parlance, she is the Ford class or the Nimitz class super carrier of her time sitting in the Mediterranean. They are attracted to that one. Illustrious Eagle. They're the HMS Prince of Wales and the Charles de Gaulle. Or HMS Queen Elizabeth and Charles de Gaulle. And the Charles de Gaulle, the one with the worked up air group, which has been going for a long time, gets damaged. Illustrious is the Queen Elizabeth. She's the capable vessel. We're not going to you cannot say she's not capable. Look what her air group manages to do. And the fact that she has capacity to take more aircraft than is normally assigned is quite useful because that allows you to surge because you need this. But she's not the one the enemy are paying attention to. And in fact, in many ways, Eagle not being available for the operations, Eagle being strapped in harbour, adds another layer because the Italians know she's in harbour. So they know not only is Ark Royal out hunting, but Illustrious is the only carrier in the Eastern Mediterranean Sea. Oh, yeah, it's just the convoys going back and forth. That's bad enough, but it's just a convoy. They're not going to attack Taranto. Even all the reconnaissance going overhead, which there is a debate as to whether or not it tips off the Italians or doesn't tip off the Italians. They don't react to it. And therefore, you could end up with Giulio Cesare being the last Italian battleship available. And if you combine that with the attacks into Taranto Strait, I don't think the Italian Navy comes out as soon. I don't think you end up with possibly the... I don't think you end up with what happens with Operation White. I don't think you end up with what happens with the Battle of Cape Spartivento because, let's be honest, they'll only have one battleship available at that point. So they might come out, but again, it'll be one battleship versus a battleship and a battle cruiser and Ark Royal. And that's not really a good scenario for the Italians to have the Royal Navy having two battleships versus, well, a battleship and a battle cruiser versus their single remaining battleship. And this is all before we get into the discussions of what had happens for the further war. So, this is a thought for you. If the fire doesn't happen on HMS Illustrious that stops the attack on the 21st of October, you have those two carriers. If they find the damage done to Eagle earlier, because she's back in service by pretty much the 14th of November, so it's found on the 5th, and it's about 9 days she's back later. She's back in service and back available for operations. If it's found on the 27th of October, those 9 days, well, that's going to just take it to the 3rd of November. So she's going to be available for operation. She's going to be available for the attack. and it should have been found in the checks for the 27th of October. 27th of October when she's protecting the previous convoy. That it wasn't is bad maintenance, or possibly engineers' wishful thinking that they can maintain it while it's at sea and keep it going, just to keep the carrier operational. I'd say it's more likely that. More likely a thing of, well, sure, we can fix it without even needing to dock and tell anyone, and we can keep the ship operational, and it's useful. Because Eagle is useful. If either of those scenarios happen, then Julius Caesar becomes probably the only battleship available to the Italians for the next 6 months. During a critical campaign period in North Africa, before the Africa Corps gets out there, and as the British, and stopping possibly both Italian interdiction of supplies going to Malta, as supplies being built up in Malta, but also Italian support of operations versus Crete. Because remember, it's Italian amphibious forces which go and help out with Crete. If the Italian fleets have been taken out of the options, then Crete becomes very different. Yes, you still are facing the air power, but you're facing a very different capability. The lesson of this what if, the lesson of M8, the lesson of all these operations going on, is a simple one, which has to be rammed home time and time again, whether you're talking about a business, whether you're talking about a school, whether you're talking about police, fire service, armed forces, whatever you're talking about. The phrase "we go to war, we carry out operations with what we have" is wrong. It's what we have available. Because there is the equipment you have available on paper. On paper, the Mediterranean Fleet has 2 aircraft carriers, Eagle and Illustrious. But when Eagle gets damaged and needs to be repaired, they go down to 1. 1 aircraft carrier. And that doesn't cut the strike by half, because there are 45 aircraft in this first strike, which you can do because you have 7 Gladiators and 15 Fulmars, so you have 22 fighters. So you can afford to send 9 to go and do something, and you'll still have 12. You'll still have 13 to cover you back, because you have 22. Still have 13 fighters to cover you, no matter if you lose them all, and you shouldn't lose them all. You go from 36 swordfish to 21 to actually 20 launching the attack. You achieve so much, but on paper you should have achieved far more. This is a lesson of Operation Judgment. This is a lesson of M8 as a whole. This is a lesson of the entirety of human history. You fight wars. You conduct operations. Whatever you do it with what you have available. A business cannot operate based on what it has on paper. It can openly operate on what of that it has on paper is actually available to work. If I am a logistics company and I have 60 lorries, but I only employ 60 drivers. If a driver goes ill, I only have 59 lorries available. If a lorry's down, I have only 59 lorries available. Doesn't matter if I have 60 drivers. So I always have to function out, should I have X number of extra lorries, or should I have some sort of methodology of being able to call up more lorries? And this is the other thing with Operation Judgment. This filters into the whole issue of losing courageous, losing glorious earlier in the war. If they had not been lost when they were, they would have been a factor in these early Mediterranean campaigns. The more carriers you have available for the early Mediterranean campaigns, the more likely you are to inflict serious damage on the Italian forces. The earlier you inflict serious damage, the safer your fleets become later in the war, because you then don't have to risk other assets to protect them. You don't. If the Italians are down to one battleship, how many battleships do you have to risk in the Mediterranean? Do you have to have them sitting in Alexandria Harbour, where they could get attacked by men in human torpedoes? No, you don't. Which can change how many ships you have, what ships you have available for the home fleet. Which can change what when you send ships in for maintenance. Which can change what ships you have available for the Far East when that comes up. All these are factors. Now, getting to Wilhelmshaven is actually quite difficult. Doable, but it's difficult to attack the Germans equivalently. The Italian fleet is the most capable and well-rounded of the Axis fleets in the war until the Japanese enter it. That is without doubt. But they're also the ones with the weakest and most exposed principal harbour, and that is Taranto. The bigger and more powerful attack you can launch on Taranto, the more likely you are to knock out the Italians. And that is why the British worried about launching an attack. It wasn't something which was lightly considered and lightly done, because, believe it or not, Cunningham didn't want to tell the Italians how weak they were. He didn't want to show them the weakness. He wanted to hammer the weakness, not illustrate it. He had to pull the trigger because he had to cover off our operations going, not ongoing at the time. So he had to do it when he did, when his hand was eventually forced. But you have to imagine he was probably sitting there thinking, do I wait? Do I hold off again? Because he'd held off after the 21st of October, from doing the 21st of October, because Illustrious wasn't going to be available for the sort of fire. Held off. Pushed off because he wanted both carriers. It could have been HMS Eagle launching this strike solo on 21st of October if he'd, without Illustrious. That would have been one of the history books. Galileo Caesar. Lucky in terms of her placement. Very lucky. And that is Operation Judgment, really. The what if. So if you like these videos, and I do recommend you go watch the first video, the original video. That this was 10 minutes in, but as I was doing a second video, I thought, well, I reckon I'll make it the full length I wanted to do. Then please do subscribe, because I currently am in a competition with my aunt. My lovely aunt has said that if I reach 13,000 subscribers by December the 31st, 2021, she and my uncle will wear Blackburn face mask and take a picture of it, and I'll be able to put it up in cruise ships on January the 2nd. I won't get there if you don't like these videos. I won't get there if you don't comment on these videos. I won't get there if you don't subscribe. So it's all up to you. But whether or not I win this familial bragging rights bet. And trust me, nothing's more important than familial bragging rights. Thank you very much. I hope you've enjoyed the video. I hope you found it interesting. And I said, please go watch the full one on M8. I'm sorry the last 10 minutes came in silent. And I'm not going to try and make this into high definition, because I'm going to go out and figure out why that went wrong before I attempt it again with another long patrol. Thank you and take care.